start. Welcome to the Icebox, also known as Salon 1. My name is Mark Kaplan. I'm with BASF, and I have the honor and privilege of introducing our speaker today, Lucas Haag. So of course we're very happy to have Lucas as an instructor today. Lucas Haag was raised in a diversified dryland farming and ranching operation near Lebanon, Nebraska, just right near the Kansas-Nebraska line. He received his BS in Ag Technology Management in 2005, and his Master's in Agronomy in 2008 from Kansas State. Lucas served as an assistant scientist at K-State's Southwest Research Extension Center in Tribune, Kansas for 3 years, and completed his PhD in agronomy in 2013. He's currently an assistant professor of agronomy in Northwest area agronomist with Kansas State, stationed at the Northwest Research Extension Center in Colby, Kansas. He has extension agronomy responsibilities for 26 counties in Northwest and North Central Kansas. He conducts research and extension activities in a variety of areas, but specializes in precision ag and dryland cropping systems. Lucas also remains actively tied to production ag as a partner with his brothers, Haagland Cattle Company. Without further ado, Lucas Haag.
All right. Thanks, Mark. I just can kind of move around, not use the mic if everybody can hear me sufficiently well. Okay. So appreciate the introduction, and it's a little bit of a spin-off some work we started last spring. You know, as we enter into some new economic times, how does that change how we might approach fertility management? Should it change how we approach fertility management? So a little bit of thoughts on that. This is going to be, we're going to kind of start big picture. We do got a few tidbits mixed in here in terms of, you know, what we think some best management practices for wheat might be. You got a little bit of a taste of that already in the farmer discussion panel. We'll hit on some of those topics that were brought up as well. I want to keep this fairly interactive. If you got questions, comments, or whatever, by all means, just raise your hand or shout something out, and we'll have that conversation. I'll tell you right now, I've already got, there's more slides here than we got time for. We're kind of starting with what I think is most important and working our way down, and however far we get. And the most important thing is I want to make sure we have time to have some discussion or answer any questions folks might have this morning. So we're going to talk a little bit about historic and current price ratios and how that might impact our decision-making process. And really kind of some big picture things about thinking, understanding how do crops respond to fertilizer. Economics of soil testing, we'll spend some time on that, and then we'll actually get into a little bit on just nuts and bolts of products and placing. Okay, so this I think is kind of an informative thing to think about. It gives us a little bit of a perspective on where we're at today versus historically. And so what we're looking at here is a wheat to nutrient price ratio. Okay, how many pounds of wheat does it take to buy a pound of nutrient? Okay, and so what I did here is this data set. We're going from December of '85 up through June. This is the most current data I could get. This is monthly, the Kansas average. What NASS reports is the average price received for corn and wheat versus urea or DAP priced at the Gulf. Okay, so if we kind of look here, the dark blue line is wheat to P. How many pounds of wheat does it take to buy a pound of phos? The dashed line here is how many pounds of wheat does it take to buy a pound of N. Okay, so it gives you kind of some historical context in terms of where we're at, in terms of that relative value between these two things. If we look at our long-term averages, that blue line represents this data set, the average, how many pounds of wheat it takes to buy a pound of P. You can see that we've come down a little bit when I first put these numbers together in January. Basically, if you took out this spike, how many of you remember this situation in 08 when we had phosphorus prices really spike up on us there? Really, if you kind of take that outlier out, here at the beginning of this year, we were basically at all-time highs in terms of that ratio, in terms of how many pounds of wheat it took to buy a pound of phos. Okay? Now, if you think about that ratio, the more out of line that is, well, I guess here for a minute, let's look down here at the red line. So this is nitrogen, okay? Yeah, we're above the average, but really not as dramatically as we are in phosphorus. So if you think about all other things being equal, and we know that wheat is highly responsive to phos, and if we think about which one of these nutrients, if you had to focus all your efforts on only one nutrient, which nutrient is more likely to pay you some return from more attention to its management? Probably phos, right? Okay, it's a more expensive nutrient relatively speaking, and we're dealing in a crop that responds well to it. Anyways, that gives you an idea on wheat. Just to throw it in here to something else to think about. Here's where we're at on row crop, corn or sorghum. Here's that ratio. Same way, on the solid line here, how many pounds of corn does it take to buy a pound of P? And the dashed line, how many pounds of corn does it take to buy a pound of N? We're actually below the long-term average on nitrogen from a row crop standpoint. Even with corn prices where they're at right now. Same on P, slightly below average. So where does that come into play when we're thinking about how we manage our nutrients? And it comes back to thinking about and understanding how do crops respond to fertilizer and what the role soil test plays into that. Okay? So we've got three different situations here. Okay? So what we're looking at is we've got yield and how it responds to as we add more pounds of some nutrient. Okay? It could be N, P, K, whatever. Okay, but we're looking at that under low, medium, and high soil test conditions. It's kind of thinking through what each of those scenarios kind of looks like and how that, what we're looking at here in the blue bar, that's our economically optimal range. Okay, somewhere within that range is where we want to be operating. Okay, back to Econ 101, marginal return to marginal cost, right? I want to put on as much nutrient until the return I'm getting from that last pound of E or that last pound of P or last pound of N isn't covering the cost of putting it on. So if we think about what's this look like in low soil testing conditions, okay? If I get my soil test results back and I've got soil test p-values on a Bray or a Mehlich scale that are 5, 10 part per million, okay, that's at the low end. What's that mean to my decision in terms of where my economic optimum is? Well, with that low soil test, we know we're going to have low yields unless we add some fertilizer. Okay, the economically optimal range is pretty narrow, and that is that it's going to take a fair bit of fertilizer applied in that sufficiency type approach to optimize our economics on the deal. The optimum rate is pretty minimally affected by that price ratio. Okay, that ratio doesn't have a lot to do with it. We're so deficient, we don't have enough nutrient reserves in the soil that unless we apply enough to get our yields up kind of in this breakover range, we're not optimizing our economics. Okay? So the ratio doesn't drive that a whole lot. That changes a bit as we go to medium soil test levels. Okay? So if you're sitting there in that 10 to 15, using phos as an example, 10 to 15, 10 to 16 part per million, maybe on even up to 18 part per million, we're kind of in that medium soil test range. That gives us a lot of flexibility, okay? And that is we've got enough fertility in the soil that cutting in a one-year decision framework, cutting back is not going to hurt us that bad economically because we're up here on this flat part of the curve, okay? We got enough fertility that we can pull back a little bit. Understand that, we're mining a little bit. We're not at least putting removal rates on. We are mining, but in that 1 or 2 year framework, we can afford to cut back. Okay? And so if we think about this range, a lot wider than what we've seen before. And what drives where we're at on this range, that's driven by that grain to nutrient price ratio. Okay? The more out of line we are on that relationship between value of grain and the value of phos, the more we ratchet this back. Okay? Because it's taking more pounds of wheat to buy a pound of wheat. Okay, that threshold, that where marginal returns equals marginal cost, is further back down the line. So as that ratio goes up, we move it down. Say wheat prices go up or phosphorus prices go down, that ratio starts to decrease. Okay, P becomes relatively cheaper compared to wheat. Then it pays us to move further up that line. Okay, to chase those last bushels of yield through phosphorus. Okay, so if we got medium test levels compared to low, we expect yields to be higher if we don't apply anything. That range, as we said, that range of optimal rates is wider. And again, in a single year decision framework, we're very sensitive to this price ratio. But understanding that if we can do that for a couple years, but year over year, if we're not at least meeting removal needs, what's happening to our soil test values? We're mining them down. Okay? So we got to balancing that this year versus long-term situation. And then we got a situation we'd all like to be in, high soil test levels. If you're sitting out there, say you're out in Wichita County, Kansas, have a long time history of beef manure application, you got soil test P levels in 150, 300 part per million. What's the economical optimum rate of phosphorus to apply to that wheat? Other than maybe some starter, 0. Okay, so that's a situation we would like to be in. Another piece of that is, okay, let's think about we're putting wheat in behind a failed row crop. And that failed row crop had 120, 130 pounds of N put down with it, and that's still showing up in a profile nitrate test. Okay, that economically optimal rate for N on that wheat crop, and we got to take that into account. That optimal rate's a lot lower if we've got that banked in the profile. Okay, so understanding where these are, where in our operation, you can think about this. Okay, if we're managing at the field level, be willing to make fertility rate adjustments at least on the field level. If I've got a field out there where my soil test P's up in the 30s, I need to be looking at that a lot differently than that field that's averaging down around 12. Okay, we can take this to the next level, to a grid sampling or a site-specific approach. Okay, it's the same situation there. Those areas that have adequate soil fertility, I'm not going to apply more nutrients in those areas. I'm going to target into the areas where I've got those 8, 9, 10 part per million soil test levels, using phosphorus as an example. So, but again, just kind of understanding these 3 different, and understanding in any given field on your operation, maybe your operation as a whole, or even if we're thinking site-specific, where am I at? Where's that economically optimal range? Low soil test levels, I really can't afford to back off what the recommendation is, because the penalty for under-applying, I have no reserve in the soil, the penalty for under-applying is so steep. Here, I've got a lot of flexibility. I can let this year's economic conditions play a bigger role in my decision process, and here the answer is pretty easy. Okay, what's that actually look like if we think about yield response to applied nutrient? Okay, so this is taking our K-State recommendation, a lot of field data, and backing it out into what some different, on average, anticipated responses might look like. So here we're talking about yield versus applied P at different levels of soil tests. Okay, so this comes back to, again, if I'm down here in my low soil testing soils, I can't afford not to be up here because the penalty is so steep for being less than that. It pays me to put phos on across this entire range if I'm in a soil test level of 5. If I'm up here at 20, which our critical value, we think somewhere between 18 and 20 part per million for most soils, most scenarios in Kansas, it's pretty flat. Okay, and so again, that's where that price ratio comes in. It doesn't pay us a whole lot to put on a lot of phos if we're already at soil test level of 20. I know it's a weak school, but we can illustrate the same thing with corn, looking at nitrogen. How much residual profile N do I have? Okay, if I've got 10 pounds in the profile, 30, 50, 70, if I've already got 70 pounds in the profile for dryland corn, I've already got 70 pounds in the profile for dryland corn, that's a pretty flat curve in terms of the response of adding more. Okay, so what's this mean, if you send your results off to K-State or one of the private labs, whoever, you get a set of recommendations back that are typically put to you in the context. How many of you are familiar with the term sufficiency versus build or maintain? How many of you know what program you're using on your place? Okay? So thinking about and understanding those differences and what they mean from a single year decision framework, as well as long-term consequences of choosing one or the other. Okay, so if we think about sufficiency programs, that recommendation that's coming back to you, the intent is to basically, we're estimating the average amount of P that you would need to, on average, across a number of years, provide the optimum economic return to the fertilizer in the year of application. Okay? With basically little consideration for future soil test values. And if you follow a sufficiency approach long enough, or at least K-State sufficiency approach, most all of them are the same. The economics are, the decision and the economics are based on this year. How much FOS do I need to apply this year to optimize my economic return? If you follow that long enough over time, your soil test values will stabilize in pretty much the low soil test range. Okay? We're not putting in much regard for long term. It's about it's really driven by single year economics. It's not all bad, but you need to be aware of that. Okay? And there are points in time where that might be the right model to follow. This being one of them. So just understand that that's kind of what's going on. It's built around how do we get the economic return this year in the year of application. Okay, the alternative to that, build, maintain. Okay, so basically we're saying we're going to apply enough P or K to build to some target soil test level. So here in Kansas, that's 20 part per million on FOS over some time frame. And then once we're there, then we're just going to apply back on based on crop removal. So our goal is to maintain that critical threshold value. So our goal here is not in a single year framework. It's not to maximize yields in any single year, but rather the goal of this type of program is to remove P or K as a yield limiting factor over time. Okay, so very different, very much a long-term situation versus a short-term decision framework. So how do you balance that? Okay, because these things mean quite a bit differently from an economic standpoint. What do these recs look like for wheat? Okay, so here's sufficiency for wheat. Let's look at the middle of the range here, 50 bushel yield goal. How many of you are shooting for more than 50? Okay, how many are shooting for less than 50? Okay, I guess we'll stick with 50 then. Sometimes you get a room where everybody's shooting for 70 and you look silly using 50 as an example. So let's just say 50 bushel, okay? If you look down here, we're in this low soil testing range. And boy, if you got something less than 5, here's the deal about soil test phosphorus. You get below 5, there's not a lot of difference between 3 and 5. Those are basement type numbers that just basically kind of bounce around. If you're less than 5, you're empty. And whether it says 3 or 5 or 6 is pretty irrelevant at that end of the scale. But if you're on those really low soil test values, again, we'll say you're on the steep part of that yield response curve, you can't afford not to put on P. On a sufficiency-based approach, we're recommending 60 pounds of P. Okay? Remember, okay, so wheat removal, 50 bushel, it's about half a pound of P per bushel of wheat. So 50 bushel wheat removes about 25 pounds of P. We're putting on 60 here. And the reason for that, a sufficiency in a one-year framework, not only do we have to meet the needs of the total crop uptake needs of the crop, because there's essentially nothing in the soil for it to use, we have to meet the total uptake needs of the crop, cover some of that removal, and also understand that at that low soil test values, there's a lot of that P is just going to flat get tied up. Okay? And so that's why we're such high levels there. Notice once we get above 20, where we're saying that threshold value is in a sufficiency recommendation, we go to 0. Other than you see the asterisk there, and that is we always recommend some starter we think can be a good thing, especially in no-till situations. Okay? So when we ratchet that up, you're in this kind of medium, high soil test range, 15 pounds of P. You can see kind of how that declines down. I pulled this out of the full publication that explains the build, the maintain versus sufficiency, and how the K-State recommendations work. You can just Google MF 2586 and it will pull up the full spiel, not just for wheat, but for all crops that we have recommendations for. Okay, so there's sufficiency. What's build and maintain look like? Well, it becomes a little more complicated. So we got some other factors that come in. What's my current soil test level, and how many years am I willing to spend building up to that critical value? Okay. So if we think about, I'm starting down here at these basement level values of like 5 part per million, and I want to build to 20 in 4 years, that's going to take a boatload of FOS. Okay? Probably not how economically viable is that today? We are not in a period of time where strong build programs pencil out. That's been the last couple of years. Okay, that's when we should have been implementing build maintain programs, has been the last couple of years. And the guys that have done that are going to be able to cash in on some of that now when they need to maintain some profitability. But you see, because think about build and maintain, what do we have to do? We've got to cover the crops needs, the crops removal, and have enough extra in that recommendation to start building us our way to that critical value. It takes about 18 pounds of phos to change soil test 1 part per million in most Kansas soils. Okay? So you start thinking about how much extra it takes to build from a 5 to a 20. Well, that's 15 part per million spread. What's 15 times 18? That's how many extra pounds of phos we need above crop use and crop removal in order to build that soil test level. Okay? So if we go from 4-year, 6-year, 8-year, obviously it makes it a little more palatable, but it's still pretty steep for the economic conditions we're in if you're starting with these low soil test levels. I think this has an important thing to play. We're seeing this land market cool off a little bit. If you're thinking about renting a piece of ground, buying a piece of ground, I don't think you can ignore what's the economic value that soil test P brings to a piece of ground. How much more can you afford, if you're looking at buying a quarter, how much more can you afford to pay for a quarter that's got a soil test P of 25 part per million versus 5? When you start thinking about that, that's real dollars. Okay? Something that I think probably often doesn't enter into our land decisions often enough is what's some of these things like soil test P, soil test K, those of you are in areas where liming is an issue, pH, those things that require long-term investments in fertility, those are some things that probably need to have some bigger weight in our leasing and purchasing decisions. Okay, so we looked at sufficiency and build and maintain. Okay, well, let's look at a scenario here. I stuck in 45 cents per pound P. That's maybe just a little bit high. Any retailers in here can tell me, is that a little high or not too far off? Okay. 60 bushel yield goal. So this is looking at what's the cost per acre, just P, no application, at different soil test levels. So the purple line here is if you follow the sufficiency recommendations. The dotted blue lines with a 4-year build and maintain. Dashed orange lines with an 8-year build and maintain. Okay? This is why we got to give sufficiency approaches a pretty hard look here. Especially, if you're at low soil test levels, you can't afford this $45 an acre deal. We're looking at how do we maximize returns for $25 an acre. And so I think, and an important thing I think was really stated this morning is we can't afford to skimp, but we do got to be very wise about where we spend our dollars. How's that penny wise, pound foolish type deal? Make sure we're putting the dollars where they belong. So if we look at this, if we get into this medium range here, if we're at 15 part per million soil tests, so not too far off of optimum. I think not probably a bad average. If I guess what our average value across the state of Kansas is, I don't think 15 would probably be too far off. Well, now we're talking $7, $8 for a sufficiency type approach versus that $17 on up to $20 if we're in a build and maintain strategy. Now, this is going to vary a lot by operator. It's going to vary a lot by individual financial situation. What are some things we should think about when we're looking at a strategy? Okay. What's the anticipated length of time I have to recapture that investment? Okay. How old am I? How many more years do I plan on farming? Okay. I'm not picking on the age of anybody, but that is a serious question, though. If you're within 3-4 years of retirement, and your local land market doesn't really pay a premium for high soil test P ground, why put that money out there? You're not going to reap the rewards of that in your career. Okay? Now, if I'm 25 years old and I have ground that I think I'm going to be farming for a long time, hey, if I've got some extra dollars in the cash flow, it makes a lot more sense for that individual to be looking at a build and maintain situation. Anticipated land tenure. Do I own the ground? Is it in some type of long-term relationship? Or is it stuff I could lose next year? that needs to play a role in how we think about how we manage things like P and K and pH. Current year economics, and this is really what's trumping us today. What do I need to do to make things work for this year? And even if you might have been on a build maintain situation, you're looking at the cash flows or cost return budgets for this year's crop, you start coming to the realization that I have to go to sufficiency approach unless I want to further deepen my equity burn. Okay, so balancing those situations. Current soil test levels. You know, if you're below that 10 part per million, I'm not sure you can afford to do anything other than sufficiency right now with the situations we're in. But if you're in that 15 to 20 part per million and you can stay on that build maintain approach and make it work financially, then there's probably some benefit to that. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of our long-term things, P, K, or kind of some concepts for P and K. Any comments or questions about anything so far? How many of you have been doing build and maintain? Mike, I know you well enough to pick on you. Are you going to continue doing build and maintain? Well, how you guys have been doing it. How are you going to adapt that with
my comment about grid soil sample for the whole farm, and everything is generally somewhere between 20 and 80 parts per million. So last fall, as I was putting in some of my wheat following beans, I was going to bone dry ground. There was no chance of it coming up. Thought it was fine for crop insurance. And so I did not put any starter down, saying, well, I have plenty in the soil. It shouldn't be an issue. Got good rains, ended up growing a 70 bushel crop. But where it followed beans, I could see every 30 inches apart across the field where I put starter on milo corn the year before, I could see greener, taller wheat. In spite of even where it was 78 parts per million. And so your comments about starter, no matter what, I think have some validity. Normally in a situation like that, I would have at least used 20 pounds of starter just so there's something there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think that's a good point, especially when you think about the scenario. Not an uncommon scenario in central Kansas, or we go out west, we're talking more wheat after corn, but we're talking about planting, cool conditions, situations that we especially expect starter to show a response, right?
you see that tic-tac-toe thing? Well, you should have
Should put it on. Yes, that's an important point. I mean, behind all of our recommendations to manage your soil test level, we generally, I like to see some starter on. An important comment that came up in the producer panel is, look at the cost of that starter. Okay, what's low salts are nice, they're a valid product. They are low salt, but what's it costing me per pound of heat? Can I get the same thing out of just some straight 1034 up? Recognize there's some safety issues involved, but we'll hit on that here in a minute.
So you're not talking much about K, so the yield response versus the cost, you don't.
So, and on K, we made, basically all the examples and the frameworks for P pretty much are that same. We see the same type of relationships as K as we do P. I'm biased because I'm fortunate in my territory we don't have to worry about K a whole lot.
Well, we didn't think we did either thanks to soil tests last couple of years. It seems to be really dropping down.
Yeah, and so the other thing, and not disputing that at all, but the other thing I always have to remind people, especially when they're new coming into looking at K, is understanding there can be a lot of variability in soil tests for K based on environmental, drought conditions, how those samples were handled prior to the lab. And so I'm not discounting what you say at all, but that's just something for people who have never dealt with K before. Some of those, if you sample today versus 6 months from now versus a year from now, you get some much wider fluctuations than what people are accustomed to seeing, for example, in soil test phosphorus. But the framework in which we think about K is really similar to phosphorus because it's the same type of response curves, and really the economics we're dealing largely with it, by and large a non-mobile nutrient. So that economics of being able to bank it in the soil works the same way as P. Yes, sir.
On grid sampling, we do the same as he does on grid sampling. And we're on a 4-year rotation on it.
Would you suggest stepping it up to 2 or 3 years, or would you stay on 4 years?
So, okay, so the question is, currently grid sampling on 4 years, should a person step that up? You know, I think, and I actually yanked the slides out, we was gonna do some more grid sampling stuff today, but, you know, I'm not sure I'd necessarily speed that up, but it depends on what other data I have. You know, if I have good yield monitor data, and I can monitor phos removal from yield maps, then I guess I'm not necessarily convinced that I would step it up quicker than that.
Would you lengthen it?
I think you could make some arguments to lengthen it. I guess the strategy I like to employ is we start with an initial grid sample. And then in that field, we kind of take a range of soil types and a range of initial soil pHs and establish some benchmark points. And so then at some point down the road, 4, 5, 6 years, maybe we don't re-grid the whole field, but we go back to those benchmark points, sample those, and say, okay, you know, our back of the envelope math using yield maps and saying how much P we've removed, our checkbook method, are we on track? And those benchmark points say that, you know, are things trending along the way we expect them to? And I guess that's one strategy that I think can work.
That's kind of what we're doing. You know, we use the yield monitor data to correct our prescriptions and then grid sample every 4 years. And I think that saves some expense. I mean, the yield monitor is already in the combine anyway. Why not use it? You know, why not get it calibrated? And it's very, very important piece. But and I think to do kind of some of the things you're talking about, you know, we're working on this. Haven't quite got it figured out, but all the heat goes on from the drill, the 1152.0. And we're actually going to mount hydraulic drives on our drill to variable rate that feed and kind of manage this a little bit. What you're saying. So I think this is going to be the next 5 years going to be a more crucial time to be thinking about things like that. So
Yes, and like I said, and what you're talking about is exactly the example I pulled out. You know, and we can have some discussion. There's some folks that argue, well, you know, removal factors vary across the field. And yeah, there's noise, there's slop in this, but I still think we're better off than a whole field approach. And so, exactly as you're saying, if we've got a good calibrated wheat yield map, we take that times 0.5. That's our best guess at a phosphorus removal map that we're going to get. And so let's use that to drive the scripts. And so, and even if we've been in a build-maintain situation and we have to go to sufficiency for a couple of years, we still know what we're putting on and what we're taking off. So we can maintain, keep doing that checkbook balance method at every point in the field. And then when we're ready to pick back up with the build-maintain situation, we can go strictly a removal basis. We can do that. You know, Mike threw out the example, you know, they got some fields that got 50, 60 part per million or 80 part per million soil tests. You know, if you're in that situation, you have those areas in the fields, that's what I'm doing with the starter-only situation. And we can mine some of those areas. You know, soil test P mining isn't always a bad thing. You know, there's no bonus, there's no benefit to carrying an 80 part per million soil test. Okay, so you might as well utilize some of that resource. Yeah, I think your concept's
well, and also to add to that a little bit on the starter, you know, I agree. I wouldn't cut the starter either, but I would on my prescription make a base, a minimum, and then when I had an area in the field that really needed, you know, bump it up in my prescription, my algorithm. But yeah. So.
Yeah, so on our wheat example, you know, what we do on corn, if soil test, our script reads that if soil test P is greater than 20 part per million, we go to a 3-gallon rate. If soil test P is less than 20 part per million, we go to a 5-gallon rate. And just a very simple binary type decision tree, which you have grid soil data. You can do the same thing in wheat, go from a 15-gallon rate to a 5 or 7-gallon rate based on soil tests.
On the grid sampling deal though too, you were asking about stepping it up or backing it off. Maybe not necessarily changing it, but maybe changing your size of your graph. Okay, so going from like a 3-acre grid to a 5 or 6 acre grid can make a big difference too. You know, if you want to step it up a little bit, you can always get your graph a little bit bigger instead of doing it the same size all the time. You know, that way not costing you as much per sample because you're doing a bigger area, but it's not going to kill you in the long run.
Well, like, you know, most people are on 2.5 acre grids, and I'm on 5 acre grids, and I just feel like I'm better than what I was right now. You know, I mean, and I save a little expense.
So the one, and Ben, your point's well taken. The one thing I'd caution people about those, if you you start changing the resolution you're doing your sampling at over time, it makes it tough to make comparisons across years. And so that's, I mean, not completely discounting that, but that's some people should keep in the back of their mind if they start changing that up a whole lot. Okay, good discussion. Okay, switching gears a little bit to nitrogen. So if you look at K-State's indirect, we're taking yield goal times 2.4, okay? Sometimes we really have to explain this number. We catch a lot of flack for it sometimes, especially on corn, because a lot of people talk about 8, 9 tenths of a pound of N per bushel. Same way people look at that and say, it's really high for wheat. Well, what you have to consider is this is before we take all the credits out, okay? And what that 2.4 number represents is total nitrogen uptake, okay? How much N do we need to have for all the above ground biomass, the roots, the grain? What is going to be the total nitrogen demand at the peak point in that growing season for that yield goal, okay? So that's why it starts out as a pretty large number. The other piece of this is assuming a 50% nitrogen use efficiency. I think most guys with a little bit of effort can do much better than 50%, okay? If we're placing that nitrogen below the soil surface, we can do better than that. If we're in western Kansas and we don't have leaching concerns, we can do better than that. I think that 50 I think that's a pretty tough number. I think we can do a little bit, on general, we can do better than that. Timing of topdress applications. If we're doing it when we're trying to minimize our potential for volatilization losses, that number is going to be higher. If we're using a if we're in a situation where volatilization could be an issue, and we're using a nitrogen enhancing product, that number is going to be higher. Okay, so I think it's fair to say this is worst case scenario. Okay, and if you feel confident in your nitrogen management, I guess I don't think I'd get much carried away more than 60% use efficiency, but I think you could probably give yourself a 10% credit if you feel confident about how you're minimizing nitrogen losses. Okay. So we've got yield goal. We're hoping we got profile soil test. We're given, again, our cool season crops, 10 pounds of N credit for each percent of organic matter that we expect to be mineralized. Previous crop adjustment, we're irrigating, we're accounting for what's our nitrate concentration in the water and any manure credits. Okay? I think the one thing to really pay attention to is previous crop adjustment. We're saying we're right after sorghum. This is not wheat after fallow after sorghum. We're talking about straight back into sorghum. We're saying an extra 30 pounds, same after sunflower. Okay? And sorghum, what's really driving that is especially in situations, we've got that plant staying green longer, we've got a lot of nitrogen tied up and a high seed-in ratio residue. Okay. The other thing we don't quite have on here, but what's something new that we should consider as part of this as well? Cover crops. Okay. What's the potential for that cover crop? Understanding if I've got a mix out there, what's the seed-in ratio of that above ground biomass? Okay. Do I have a lot of sorghum sedans in there? Do I have millets in there? Do I have a lot of high seed-in ratio stuff that's going to have the potential to tie up nitrogen? Okay. Understand that's not a nitrogen loss. We're going to get that nitrogen back, but as far as that wheat crop is going to see it, it's not there. Okay. So if we got high seed-in ratio, cover crop residue out there, I really think we need to be treating that a lot like sorghum or maybe more. If we're talking about 5 tons of above ground biomass out there tying up in, I'm not sure 30 pounds does it. Okay. And we understand, systems wise, we're going to get that nitrogen back, but it does change what we have to do in this crop. Yes, sir.
Do you have a guess or any see any data on what the split application of nitrogen will do to your irrigation use efficiency?
Yes, here in a couple of slides, we've got some of that. And of course, the biggest driver there is where you located, what was the weather that year, right? Western Kansas, we'd hardly ever see that positive of a response to a split application other than maybe from a protein standpoint. But certainly as we move east, shallower soils, more precipitation, that story changes quite a bit, right?
So for eastern Kansas, how much does that story change?
What's that?
For eastern Kansas, how much does that story change?
It can change quite a bit.
Where does canola fall?
than the previous crop?
Because, you know, canola gets to be bigger and bigger.
That's a really good question. I'm trying to remember off the top of my mind what the seed-in ratio of canola is. I mean, in my mind, I'm gonna treat it a lot closer to soybean than anything else. When I think about canola residue, it just doesn't stick around. I mean, Nebraskas in general are fairly low seed-in ratio. Anyone here firsthand? I mean, in my mind, canola residue doesn't last. I wouldn't expect.
Yeah, there's basically no residue.
Yeah.
No.
I guess I treat it a lot like soybean, especially when we put the time aspect in there. The canola's been off, you know, a couple months by the time we come around to drill the wheat. So I guess I wouldn't, I'd stick to 0 then, for previous crop adjustment. That's a good point. We should have canola added in our reps. Okay. Let's skip that. That's just another way of showing the same thing. Higher probability of profile land. We already talked about this a little bit. We got the previous crop lower than expected yield. Previously destroyed stands of alfalfa clovers or other legumes. Warm late falls or early warm springs. What's this drive? What process is driven by that? Mineralization, right? If we get those warm temperatures, we've got moisture there, we've got microbial activity, we're going to get more nitrate, more nitrogen coming out of that mineralization process. This is an older slide, but I think we could do this in a year and see about the same range. These are samples coming into the K-State lab prior to wheat drilling. The range of profile nitrate was from 4 to 313 pounds. What's his economically optimal nitrogen rate? Pretty close to 0, right? You can see here, you know, after alfalfa, corn, fallow, sorghum, soybean, and wheat gives you an idea there. What I want to look at, this is the data we revisited, and you probably knew Terry Castens, Kevin Dugo run our ag econ department. Back in the mid-2000s, they looked at what's the economic returns to soil sampling. What's the economic value of having that data? And so I took their stuff and revisited that this spring. Their initial, the work they did in 05 was 22-cent nitrogen and like 26-cent P. And grain prices actually weren't all that different. And so how does that change today? I ran this in January. I stuck in 40-cent nitrogen and 48-cent phos. This is the penalty for being wrong. What if you knew what was actually out in the field versus what you're guessing? So say you know nothing else, in which in the K-State rec, if you don't have a profile nitrate test, we assume there's 30 pounds in the profile. That number, that assumption is almost always wrong. Okay? But what else, you know, we know there's something to be, you gotta have a number. Okay? So this is saying, what if I'm guessing, I think I've got soil test P of 16, and I think I've got 40 pounds of nitrate out there. Now, what's the value of having the real information? What if I actually had a good soil test? Okay? So here's for wheat and corn. This is in the context of the wheat corn fallow rotation. 75 bushel yield goal on corn, 50 bushel yield goal on wheat. So I'm thinking there's 40. Well, okay, if I think there's 40 and there's really 40, no change in returns. I guessed right. Okay? Well, that never happens. What if I think there's 40, but there's really 20? I hate this thing. What if I think there's 40 and there's really 20? Okay, we're giving up about $1 an acre there. What's driving this? If I think there's 40 pounds of N out there and there's really 20, what's driving this economic loss? What'd I give up? Yield. I left yield on the table. So I assume there's more N out there than there really was. Okay, if I think there's 40 and there's really, which we never get to 0, but say there's only 3 pounds out there. Okay, now I'm talking $5 to the acre is what I left on the table by not having that information. Okay, what about the flip side? I think there's 40, but there's really 80. I'm leaving about 3 1/4 on the table. What's driving this? I over-applied fertilizer, right? I threw nitrogen out there that I didn't need. Okay, so it kind of gives you an idea of what's the value of having information versus some assumption that I have. Okay, that's nitrogen, but we showed the grain price relationships earlier. Which nutrient did we say probably had the likelihood to pay us more? Phos, right? has a better soil testing system. Our FOSS soil test is more reliable. That response that we get is typically more reliable. Okay, so here, if I'm assuming there's a 16, if it's really 16, no change, I guess right. Okay, what if I think it's 16, but it's really 11? Well, I'm leaving over $2 an acre on the table for either crop in the rotation. If I think it's 16 and it's really 6, 11, 12 bucks an acre, how serious of money is that? That'll buy some soil sample. Okay? And this, you can think about this either at the field scale, or you can think about it as making a case for grid sampling or some zone sampling, some type of site-specific sampling too. What if I assume the whole field is 16, but I've got 10% of my acres out there that are really 6? Well, I'm losing 11, 12 bucks an acre on 10% of my acres in that field. What's that do to my field average profitability? Okay. We go the same way going to the high side. Okay, if I'm assuming there's 16, but I really have 21, 26. Again, the economic penalty for over-application isn't as harsh as for being short, but there's still an economic penalty there. Okay, so how do we get good data? And some of you guys have heard me talk this a number of times. I'm sorry if it's repetitive, but we got to get as good as representation of truth as we can. And soil sampling is noisy. There's error in it, but there are things we can do to do as good a job as possible. Good decisions require good data. Good data comes from good procedures in the field. And the thing I really like to think about is how many cores does it take to make sure we've got a good sample? Okay? We know that soils vary over short distances. We've got past erosion, parent material. We also induce some variability, and we band applied anything, and we raise livestock out there. Okay, what's that small scale variability out there, either natural or stuff that we've caused? So to account for this variation, we're really saying 10 to 20 cores per sample. I think that number is 15 at a minimum, and I'll illustrate that just a little bit. So this is based on data we took on some common silt loam soils here in Kansas. This is looking at what's our confidence interval of that number you get back from the lab versus the number of cores that made up that sample. Okay? We're talking about trying to overcome small scale variability. So this relationship holds true whether we're talking about pulling a composite for a 40 or 60 acre area in a field, or whether we're talking about pulling a sample that's supposed to represent a 2 acre grid set. Okay? Because it's a small scale variability is what we're trying to overcome. So if we think about, well, if I go out there and I pull 5 cores, and I'm in Mike's field, and one of those 5 cores hit where I banded starter B in my beans last year. What's 1 out of 5 do to your average? You can skew that pretty heavily, okay? If I'm pulling 15 or 20 cores, what's 1 or 2 out of 15 or 20 do to? It's going to skew. Is it near as significant? No. And so that's where this confidence interval comes from. So if you send a sample into the lab made up of 5 cores, and the lab reports back to you, okay, it's 17 part per million. Well, in reality, that number should come with a confidence interval on it. If you send a sample with 5 cores, and it comes back 17, it's really 17 plus or minus 6 part per million. Now, okay, let's think about that. 17 minus 6, it could very well be 11. 11's getting us pretty close to that low soil test range. At 11, we need to be thinking certainly about band application. We need to be thinking about, if we're thinking about its long-term ground, hey, at some point I probably need to build this a little bit. Could come back 17, which we're getting pretty close to that sweet spot. We can either do maintenance only, or if we're looking at sufficiency, we could probably get by with very little in a single year frame. And if it comes back with 17 plus 6, 23, that's above threshold. Our recommendation in most cases would be 0. So one lab number, 3 completely different interpretations depending upon which end of the error range you're on. So how do we bring that confidence interval down? It takes more cores. It's like a lot of things in life, diminishing returns. You know, you got the fixed cost of the lab fee. You got the fixed cost of getting a guy in a 4-wheeler to the field. What we're really talking about is what's the marginal cost and time of pulling 5 versus 10 versus 15 cores. Where's that trade-off at? So if you look at that, on this diminishing return somewhere around that 15 mark. We actually looked at the economics of that. We actually put some assumptions on how long does it take me to pull extra cores? What's it cost me an hour to have that guy doing that, or if I'm doing it myself? And if we look at, this kind of gives you an idea. So this is looking at, based on those recommendations earlier, how much money am I leaving on the table by having poor quality data? Okay, so the figures I showed earlier, we were showing the potential returns to soil sampling. That's assuming we have good data. Okay, what if my data is of a lesser quality? So if you think about that, a $10 potential return, well, if my results are based off 5 core samples, I'm giving up $1.75 to $2 off of that. Okay, so my actual return is going to be around that $8, $8.25 range. Okay, I'm giving up some of that economic benefit by having lesser quality data going into that process. And so if you look at where that kind of bottoms out, where's that threshold? Again, I kind of come back to thinking it's somewhere around that 15 cores.
So going back to your grid sampling, because we've been on 2.5, would it maybe go to 5? Because on the graph previous to that, your line pretty much flatlined at 20 after it was.
So
25.
yeah, so what I want to drive home about this though is this holds true regardless of what scale you're using it at. So whether you're on 1s, 2.5s, or 5s, it still takes 15 cores to accurately characterize that area. Because it's a small cores. Well, I'm talking about how many cores go into the sample. So
you recommend on the show?
on how many acres? Well, okay, so if we're talking about a field composite, then I kind of hate to see us do much more than 40, 60 acres for a sample to represent more than 40 to 60 acres. So if you've got a full quarter, and if you can break that up by soil type or topography or anything, I think that's going to be give you more information. But even if I'm pulling a sample that's supposed to represent a 2.5 acre cell, it needs to have 15 cores in it. Because if you go out and you grid sample, even if you go out and you grid sample on a 1 acre grid, okay? Let's say you only did it with 5 cores per grid cell, 5 cores per sample. Yeah, you've got a lot of data, but all that data's got plus or minus 6 parts per million of potential noise of error around. And so what have you've paid a lot of money for some data that really doesn't tell you a whole heck of a lot. Because if the top to bottom range of the field is less than 12 parts per million, you don't know anything. Because if it was only made up of 5 cores, the error of the samples versus the range of fertility in the field, you don't know anything about. So regardless what area, I guess that's a take on. Regardless what area you're trying to characterize, it takes 20 cores or 15, at least 15 cores to really get at that, to get a good quality of data. Because it's a small scale variability that we're trying to look at. Okay, I'm about out of time. This has taken way longer than I hope you've all found value in this. Okay, we talked, some of these things we've already hit. Phosphorus and wheat, we know it's most responsive. Even high soil test P soils, we see a started response. I believe that, especially no-till, late planted conditions, we're really getting early growth and development, setting us up for good fall tiller initiation is important. This isn't a new concept. 1932, no phos, broadcast phos, and row of seed. Okay? Yeah, we're fine-tuning it a little bit, but that response has been known for a long time. We know that response gets more pronounced as we go down to the soil test level. Okay, we talked about removal. One thing I do want to hit on, we've seen a lot more soybeans added to our rotations in the states, especially the area of north central Kansas I cover. A lot of guys underestimate how much phos a good soybean crop produces. And we're talking about a lot of wheat after beans, okay? 8/10 of a pound of P per bushel of beans. You're raising some 40 bushel beans, we're carting some P off there. So being aware of that as we change our rotations. Okay, timing of in, nitrogen like P enhances early tillering. We really like to see 15 to 30 pounds in the fall at planting. if you plan on doing traditional top dress later in the spring. Especially important when planting in wide seed-in ratios. Corn stalks, wheat stubble, cover crops. Really critical that we get some nitrogen on seeding, more planting into sorghum. We kind of talked about that. We want to have enough N available to fall, especially if you're using a sensor system, to get us to that point where we can sense it with the sensor going from there. Okay, want to hit on this starter, maximum in furrow. I get this question probably 40 times every fall. Row spacing. If you're on 10-inch spacing, if you're in a silt loam soil, you can go up to 24 pounds of N plus K2O in furrow without injury. Okay? If you're in narrower rows, 7.5, you can bump that to 30 pounds of actual nutrient, not pounds of material. Okay? We need to back that off for saying your dry soils. We're doing some work looking at urea in furrow. We've always said that's a no-no due to potential injury. We're looking at some things like polymer-coated urea, NDPT, or agrotane-coated urea. Does that buy us some safety? Can we get away with that? This happens to be a Tribune. This is fall stands. There's the control. We add any amount of urea, even 10 pounds, we're dinging our fall stands. Here's 60 pounds urea in furrow. Okay, less than half the stands. We are seeing that injury. With pretty preliminary data, but it does look like ESN might buy us a little bit of safety. Some other sites this didn't look quite as good, but that's some of the things, first year data we're looking at. Timing of application. How do we minimize loss? Yet at the same time, make sure we got plenty of nitrogen available at joint. We're setting maximum kernel number, okay? Making sure we're not hurting for nitrogen at that period of time. We wait too long, we wait till after joint, we're giving up yield, 48 bushel versus 58 when we get it on ahead of joint. As we move further west, there's the other piece of this too. When's it gonna rain? Okay? We had wheat this year that had 30-gallon UAN streamed on it that was showing nitrogen deficiency quite a ways into the season because we simply have not gotten the moisture we needed to move that nitrogen down where the plant could access it. Methods on a pound-for-pound basis, pretty equal. I do like streamer bars in high residue situations. We can get that. If you're not going to use dry urea, those prills will fall down. But if you're going the liquid route, if you got high seed-in ratio residues on the ground, I think streamer bars can really play a role there. Foliar, just as effective on a pound-for-pound basis. The problem is it's often an expensive way to get nitrogen on late season. Timing-wise, we got some guys looking at it. Can we get a protein bump out of it? And they would suggest we can. But again, often it's an expensive way to get nitrogen on. It's a nice way to top some things off, but if you didn't get your top dress taken care of, this isn't going to bail you out. Okay, work on sensors. The handheld stuff's been around. These are about $500, easy to implement. Brian Ronald, who's going to give the same talk this afternoon, they do a lot of work in Oklahoma, enriched strips. I think there's a spot for that. I think either using the sensors, even visually, kind of a way to calibrate where you're at. K-State's got a tool. Put some enriched strips out. I really recommend doing that. We have an algorithm that says that you can use in theory without an enriched strip. I really like the enriched strips. Take the green seeker, sense the enriched area versus the rest of the field. Free Excel deal on the internet. Plug your numbers in and get your recommendation. Okay, we're working on UAVs. We're going to take the handheld stuff and move it to the UAV platform. Ray Benito on campus is doing some of this work with some imagery from some of the plots this year. Okay, I'm out of time, but what if we foliar apply micros? Can we see it make a difference? This is change in tissue concentration. We see it work in sulfur, zinc, and copper, not so much in manganese. We can't really move the needle. Soil test, we can pick up boron, zinc, copper, and magnesium. Some of our soil tests for micros just aren't that good. Some tissue sampling, we can pick a lot of that stuff up. Here's some on-farm work with micros. Guys, I'm out of time. Sorry. All right. If I didn't cover what you want to talk about, I'll be around. There's my contact information. I hope you found this to be of value. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you. reminder, the next session is starting in a minute or two. Like 15.
Earl Gardner, how are you? Good, yourself? There you go. Not much. Really? I'm just sitting by here. You know, so whatever. Yeah. Yeah. I was just sitting beside him. No. Full-time and doing my own, trying to do my own. Tear down. That way you were always playing.
Yeah, that's whenever I left that one town.
How many kids now? 2. 5-year-old, 2-year-old daughter. Good. Glad to hear it. I look for you.